Hi, I'm Cynthia. And yes, my parents really did skip my wedding to attend my brother's dog's obedience school graduation. They didn't call, they didn't show, but they did livestream Bruno in a cap and gown while I walked myself down the aisle. They said I was too emotional, that dogs are loyal. Then they sent me a wedding gift from the dog. Ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you? To fund your own abandonment, then sit through a celebration where your absence is edited out of the family photo wall? This isn't just about a missed wedding. It's about who gets to matter and who's trained not to ask why. Want to know what I sent them back? The morning of my wedding, I woke up to soft light pouring through the curtains of the guest house we'd rented for the weekend. The air smelled faintly of lavender and damp grass, leftovers from last night's storm. Silas had already stepped out with his father for a walk around the property. I stayed behind, staring at my reflection in the mirror, rehearsing nothing, because everything I wanted to say had already been said. I thought today would be about presence, people showing up. It turned out to be a lesson in absence. At 9:43 a.m., while I was sipping lukewarm coffee in my robe, my phone buzzed with a message from Milas. "Sweetie, we're so sorry. Bruno has his graduation today. He's been working so hard. We'll make it up to you soon. Love, Mom and Dad." I blinked once, twice. The letters didn't rearrange themselves. I read it again and again until the words felt like sand in my mouth. Graduation. For the dog. My mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. I whispered to the empty room. They chose the dog. I didn't cry. Crying implies some reaction beyond disbelief. I just stopped breathing for a beat. Then, as if on autopilot, I turned off my phone, set its screen down on the nightstand, and went back to folding napkins. When Silas returned, he asked, "Still no RSVP?" I tried to laugh. "Maybe they want to surprise me. You know, drama runs in the blood." He tilted his head, sensing more than I gave. But he didn't push. He just came behind me, pressed his hands lightly to my shoulders, and said, "We'll be okay. This day's about us." I nodded, but part of me had already detached. By 2 p.m., guests began arriving. The backyard was dressed in string lights, mismatched chairs, and the hum of acoustic guitars from the Bluetooth speaker Silas had rigged up. His parents greeted everyone like diplomats. Delora even made name tags with soft cursive handwriting. I spotted the ones labeled Parents of the Bride and felt something hollow twist in my chest. I asked Delora quietly if she could place a bouquet near those seats. I couldn't bring myself to say why. She didn't ask. At 3:30 p.m., I walked down the aisle. Alone. My best friend Marla had offered to escort me, but I refused. I wanted to own the walk, even if the space beside me felt like a canyon. Sunlight cut across the field in thin slants, catching the back of my dress, making it glow in a way I didn't feel. The two chairs, front row, center, sat untouched. Parents of the bride tags sat firmly in place. No one dared to sit there. The air around them felt sacred, or maybe cursed. Delora had moved a floral arrangement just enough to partially cover the tags, like she was shielding me from the truth everyone could still read. After the vows, when Silas and I turned to walk back down the aisle, I allowed myself a single glance over my shoulder. The chairs remained, unbothered, unoccupied, symbols of a promise that was never made and never needed to be broken, because it had never existed in the first place. A cousin whispered too loudly behind me, "Maybe Bruno's valedictorian." It wasn't cruel, it was clueless, but that made it worse somehow. People around me smiled, clapped, snapped photos. Silas's hand gripped mine tighter, anchoring me, but the part of me that had once longed for my parents' approval had already begun to calcify. Later, during the toasts, Delora gave a quiet speech. Nothing dramatic, just warmth. Family isn't always who raised you, sometimes it's who lifts you. I thanked her with my eyes. Words felt like they'd betray the weight of the day. When the sun dipped below the trees, and the cake had been sliced, I went back out to the ceremony space, alone. I stood in front of those chairs and looked at them like a crime scene. I didn't touch the tags. I didn't need to. That was the day I stopped waiting for them to show up. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the sunlight fade across those empty chairs. The music had quieted, guests drifting toward the reception tables, where fairy lights blinked like they were trying to make up for something. When Silas called my name gently from the edge of the lawn, I turned without a word. My heels crunched over the grass, and I walked back into celebration like I belonged to it. Like the silence hadn't already told me otherwise. Inside the reception tent, everything looked just as we'd planned. Simple, warm, intimate. Friends chatted, glasses clinked, someone's kid danced offbeat near the dessert table. I moved among them, smiling like a guest at someone else's event. My body moved out of instinct, stopping to greet old coworkers, thank Silas's college friends, pose for a few photos. Every time I passed the floral arch, my stomach tensed. There was no call, no voicemail, just absence, wearing perfume and lipstick like it meant nothing. Silas stayed near, never more than a few feet away. His eyes did most of the talking now. I could feel the unasked question behind every glance. "Are you okay?" And my unspoken answer? Later, Delora, ever the diplomat, quietly adjusted decorations, smoothed napkins, made people feel at ease without saying much. At one point, she handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "You're glowing, sweetheart." I nodded, grateful. She knew enough not to say more. Dinner arrived. We sat, laughed politely, shared memories with our friends. And then, without warning, Daria, my old college roommate, let out a low sound from her seat across the table. Her phone lit up. She tilted the screen toward me, like she wasn't sure I should see, but couldn't keep it to herself. It was a live stream. The title read, "Bruno's Big Day, Obedience School Grad." The video opened to a bright stage at a local pet school. A banner stretched across the back. "Congrats to our graduates." In the center, Bruno sat proudly in a tiny tuxedo-like harness, tongue hanging, tail wagging. There was Malis, front row, clapping like she was at a Broadway show. And Vernon, he was beaming. At one point, he leaned toward the camera and said, "He's our pride and joy." I stared at the screen. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. The entire table had gone quiet. Daria lowered the phone slowly, as if afraid it might bite her. I whispered, just loud enough for her and Silas to hear. "They didn't miss my wedding. They hosted another one, for someone with a tail." Silas placed a hand over mine under the table. No words, just that firm, grounding touch. Later, as we cut the cake, someone had left the live stream open on the corner of a side table. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, still paused on a frame where Malis was waving like she'd won a pageant. My fingers tightened on the cake knife. I handed the slice to Silas and muttered, "At least he sat when they asked." That night, after the last guest had gone and the lights had dimmed, I sat alone in our small rental kitchen, nursing a glass of leftover Prosecco and listening to the hum of the fridge. Silas had gone to shower. I stared at the counter where our wedding cards had begun to stack. My phone buzzed. A package would be delivered in the morning, it said. I almost forgot about it by dawn. But there it was, on the porch. A box wrapped in paper printed with cartoon bones and paw prints. I didn't open it immediately. I carried it to the kitchen, set it on the table, and stood for a moment. Then I peeled the paper back. Inside was a plush, squeaky toy, shaped like a heart. A rubber bone with gold foil around it, like a prize. And a card. The handwriting was Malis's. "Hope your marriage is as obedient as Bruno." From Bruno, I stared at the paw print. It was drawn like a child had done it. A little off-center, a little smug. This wasn't an afterthought. This had been planned. I closed the box slowly, carried it into the guest room, opened the drawer in the nightstand, and placed the card inside. I didn't speak. I didn't tell Silas. But something shifted then, not loudly, not dramatically. Like a crack in drywall that hadn't been there yesterday. That afternoon, I returned to the ceremony space behind the guest house. The chairs were still there, still marked, still watching. I picked up the 2 parents of the bride tags, walked them to the fire pit, and dropped them in. No ceremony, no words, just flame and paper. It wasn't that they forgot my wedding. They remembered something else more. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting faint shadows across the bedroom wall. I was already awake when the first bird call broke the silence. Silas was still asleep beside me, breathing steady. I stared at the ceiling, not thinking, not feeling, just floating in that gray space between numbness and recognition. I reached for my phone, half expecting a message. Nothing. Just notifications from guests tagging me in photos, congratulatory texts, and the now infamous Bruno graduation clip forwarded more times than I could count. A few taps brought up the video again. There he was, Bruno, in his miniature tuxedo, tail wagging on stage, while my parents clapped like he'd cured cancer. Vernon's voice still echoed in my head. He's our pride and joy. I closed the app, set the phone face down, and let out a slow exhale. That morning, I didn't feel like a newlywed. I felt like a wedding planner who forgot she was also the bride. While Silas made coffee downstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my old message thread with Colton. I hadn't looked at it in months. The last real conversation we had was 9 months ago, when Bruno had bitten the UPS guy and Colton had a meltdown in our group chat. "Dude's a mess," he wrote. "He flunked his last class. He's never going to get through this program." And me, in my infinite wisdom, or maybe just desperation, I replied, "I'll pay the deposit for Pine Ridge. It's supposed to be the best." His answer had come quickly. "Seriously? You'd do that?" I remembered how good it felt, like maybe I'd finally done something that made me more than background noise. A few hours later, Milas texted me directly. "You're so thoughtful. He's lucky to have a sister like you." I had believed it then. Believed that gesture meant something. That maybe I was finally earning a spot on the wall. Not a literal one, but the kind where people remember to show up for you. Now, staring at my bank app, I searched for the charge. There it was. Pine Ridge Obedience School, $750. Dated exactly 9 months ago. I took a screenshot, the corners of my mouth curling in disbelief. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just watched my parents skip my wedding. I had bankrolled the celebration they chose instead. I paid for my own erasure. The words spilled out before I realized I'd spoken them. I wandered down to the office, still in pajamas, barefoot. A drawer in the corner cabinet stuck when I pulled it, like it was resisting what I was about to find. Inside was a stack of unused thank you cards. White linen stock, gold trim. One envelope already sealed, addressed in Vernon's handwriting. I opened it. "Thanks for supporting Colton and Bruno. Couldn't have done it without you." No signature, no warmth, just a receipt in disguise. I sat in the armchair, the card resting on my lap like a verdict. They hadn't just chosen the dog. They'd used my money, my goodwill, my silence, and then they'd dressed it up with paw print wrapping paper and sent it back like a joke. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood up, went to the hallway closet, and pulled out a fresh journal. A simple one, black cover, no lines. I printed the Pine Ridge receipt and taped it inside the first page. Then I picked up a pen and wrote, "This is the cost of love, measured in obedience." I closed the journal, ran my hand across the cover once, and slid it into the drawer beside my wedding album. I thought I was invisible. Turns out I was indispensable, just silently. I didn't open the drawer again for the rest of the day. I just let it sit there, that journal pressed up against my wedding album like a wound sealed with tape. Silas noticed something in my quiet, but didn't press. We moved through the evening in choreographed silence. Dinner, dishes, a short walk, a shared blanket on the couch. Like nothing had changed, though everything had shifted just a degree off-center. The next morning, after he left for work, I stared at my phone longer than I meant to. My finger hovered over Milas's name. Part of me thought, don't do it, let them stay gone. But the part of me that still believed in some version of family, the kind that shows up eventually, dialed anyway. Vernon answered. His voice was as flat as old linoleum. Hello? Hi, I said. It's me. Silence. I was hoping to talk to Mom. Another pause. She's busy. What do you need? I swallowed. I just wanted to ask, why didn't you come? He didn't hesitate. We told you. Bruno had his graduation. You didn't think your daughter's wedding was more important than a dog learning to sit? I heard movement, maybe him handing over the phone. Then Malis came on, her tone crisp, polished. Cynthia, sweetie. You know, dogs are loyal. They don't abandon family over drama. That was it. That one line. She delivered it like wisdom, like she was quoting scripture instead of hurling a brick. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I swallowed the breath I'd been holding, let it settle in my stomach like lead. She wasn't defending her choice, I would later write. She was insulting mine. I ended the call without another word. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to the bookstore, shelved a few deliveries, answered customer questions on autopilot. Around noon, one of my regulars, an older woman named Marcy, came in looking for a gardening book. I handed it to her without looking up, but she paused, studied my face. Can I give you a piece of advice? She said gently. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I blinked. I didn't mean to intrude, she added, placing a wrinkled hand on mine. But sometimes it's not about fixing things. It's about recognizing they were never whole to begin with. Her words hit harder than I expected. A week passed. No follow-up calls, no apologies. Then a letter arrived. The envelope was addressed in Vernon's handwriting. The return address was theirs. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a folded, typed note. No handwriting, no ink, no warmth. Cynthia, marriage, when rushed, is often a performance. We chose not to encourage spectacle. Hope you understand. No love, Dad. No mention of Silas. Just cold syntax and passive aggression dressed as concern. The letter was folded perfectly, like it had been done with a ruler. It felt less like communication and more like a cease and desist. I read it twice. Then again. There was no misunderstanding here. No room for interpretation. This wasn't distance. They were cutting me loose with surgical precision. I walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the journal. I taped the letter on the opposite page of the obedience school receipt. Below it, I wrote, My wedding was a performance, but I was the only one who came with a script. They didn't miss my wedding. They dismantled it from afar. After taping that letter into the journal, I left it closed on the desk and stepped outside. The air had turned, no longer summer warm, but crisp with early fall. It smelled of drying leaves and something else, something sterile, like distance. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the usual sense. It had shifted into something colder, measured, like lining up dominoes with quiet precision, knowing exactly how they'll fall. The next morning, I called Colton. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear wind, birds, the unmistakable jingle of Bruno's leash. Hey, I said. He sounded casual. Yeah? You good now? I ignored the bait. I wanted to talk about the wedding. A pause. Look, I know things got messy, but, it's not like anyone died. Colton, I said, steady. You all didn't just miss the wedding. You ignored it, pretended it wasn't happening. He let out a small laugh, like I just accused him of stealing snacks from the fridge. You're being dramatic, Sin. It's just a wedding. Bruno's been training for months. Dad said it was fine. I stayed quiet. He added, Not everything revolves around you. There it was. The sentence that finally drew blood. Not everything. Just everything that didn't involve me. I could have hung up. But instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I hit back. You know what's funny? I said, my voice calm, deliberate. I paid for Bruno's training. That program you all were so proud of? The little tuxedo, the streamers, the pride and joy? That was me. I funded my own abandonment. His silence wasn't regret. It was surprise. Why do you always keep score? He muttered. I almost laughed. Because someone has to. You all certainly don't. I ended the call without waiting for a reply. That afternoon, a text buzzed through from a family friend, someone who hadn't realized I'd been cut out. No caption, just a photo attachment. I opened it, expecting more wedding congratulations. Instead, I saw Bruno, graduation cap crooked, tongue lolling, surrounded by family. Vernon, Malis, Colton, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone smiling, clapping. Behind them, a cake. You did it, Bruno! My stomach clenched, not in pain, but in clarity. The message that followed said, "Such a proud moment for your family. Sad you couldn't be there." I stared at it for a long moment before whispering, I was never invited to Pride, just to Patience. I printed the photo at the shop, circled each face in red ink, one by one. Not with rage, with recognition. That night, I opened the journal again. On the left, my wedding photo, Silas holding my hand under the arch, his parents behind us, the two empty chairs barely visible. On the right, the graduation picture. One side full of people who chose me, the other people who forgot I existed. I taped the new photo in. Then I wrote beneath it, "Next time someone asks who raised me, I'll show them the silence. The first time I bled, I didn't scream. But this time, I answered. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I wasn't tossing and turning. I just lay there, still as stone, eyes open to the dark. My mind wasn't racing either. It was oddly quiet, like the room after a long conversation has ended. Everything had been said, even the unspeakable. In the morning, I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out an old white box I'd once used to store Christmas cards, and brought it to the desk. The air felt heavier around it, like it already knew what it was about to hold. I opened my drawer and removed the printout, the Pine Ridge receipt, folded it neatly, placed it inside. Then I wrote a note, plain as breath, and set it on top. You raised a loyal dog. I raised myself. No venom, just fact. I taped the box shut, addressed it with their house number, no name, no return label, and placed it in the outgoing pile at the bookstore. No ceremony, no announcement, just motion. I didn't check for confirmation. I didn't ask if they got it. That was the point. Some things speak louder when you stop yelling. That evening, Silas returned from work and watched me as I watered the plants along our front porch. Something about my movements must have tipped him off. It wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose. After dinner, he handed me a leather-bound book. I paused, unsure if it was a gift or a gesture. It was both. I had it made this week, he said, just in case you wanted to keep it all in one place. Inside were printed screenshots, every text that stung, every image that bruised, the RSVP that never came, the stream from Bruno's graduation, my father's cold letter, my mother's dig about loyalty. I ran my fingers across the paper, tracing the edges of every moment I'd been told, directly or otherwise, that I wasn't enough. You don't owe anyone an explanation, Silas said softly, but if you ever do, you'll have your receipts. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Instead, I hugged him. Longer than usual. Long enough to mean thank you. Long enough to mean I'm still here. That night, I placed the notebook beside our wedding album. They sat like siblings, one documenting what was built, the other what had tried to unravel it. On the cover, I wrote in silver ink, "This is why I chose peace." The next morning, I made a quiet list. I called my doctor, updated my emergency contact, removed their names from the records. Then I did the same with the bank, the insurance company, the pharmacy. Each call was its own kind of closure. No tears, no explanations, just formality. Some exits don't require slamming doors. Just a slow walk through them, head held high. In the afternoon, I went back to the porch, sat with a glass of tea, watched leaves fall without trying to catch them. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped painting over the rot. The leaves had just begun turning when I decided to go. The morning was crisp, the air humming with the scent of pine and damp concrete. I didn't tell Silas. I didn't need his opinion, or his comfort, or even his protection. I just needed to see for myself how far they'd taken the erasure. I didn't call. I didn't text. I pulled the old birthday card from my drawer, one I'd written for Melis 2 years ago and never sent. It still said, "Love you," in blue ink. I slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into my purse. Their house looked exactly the same. White siding, perfectly trimmed hedges, a seasonal wreath on the door. A facade of warmth layered over a hollow I knew too well. I rang the bell once, then twice. It was Milas who opened the door. She blinked, startled, but didn't step aside. "Cynthia," she said flatly, "we weren't expecting—" "I know." She hesitated, then motioned me in. "Vernon's out walking Bruno." Of course he was. I stepped into the living room. It smelled of potpourri and silence. Everything was clean, arranged, untouched. And then I saw it. The wall. It had grown. Where once there were a few framed photos, now stretched an entire gallery of memory curated by a mission. Colton as a toddler. Colton at graduation. Bruno wearing a party hat. A canvas print of Melis kissing the dog on the nose. Gold script underneath reading, "First grandbaby." I scanned the whole thing twice. No wedding photo, no engagement announcement, not even a childhood picture of me. Not a single inch of wall space acknowledged that I had ever existed in this family. I swallowed the sting, let it settle deep. "Seems the dog made valedictorian, again," I said, eyes still on the canvas. Melis's voice wavered. "It's just tradition, honey. That wall's been there forever." I turned to her. Not with rage, but with precision. "So has your silence." She flinched slightly, but said nothing. I reached into my purse, pulled out the card, and walked to the hallway table. I placed it down gently. "I won't stay," I said. "This wasn't a visit. It was a confirmation." Then I left. Not a door slam, not a backward glance. Just the sound of gravel under my boots and a wind that had finally shifted direction. That evening, I pulled into Delora's driveway without calling first. The lights were on. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been waiting. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer pity. She just opened her arms, and I stepped into them. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. "Not to them. Not to me." It was the kind of embrace you remember. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded you that some people know how to hold you without explanation. Later that night, I stood in my hallway with a hammer in one hand and a new photo in the other. Me and Delora at the wedding, arms linked, eyes laughing. I picked a spot on the wall above the bookshelf, marked it, and drove the nail in with 2 firm strikes. I hung the frame, not because I needed to fill the space, but because I was finally ready to start my own wall. The wall they built forgot me, so I started building one of my own. It had been a week since I hung the photo with Delora, and I hadn't touched social media in days. But that morning, something nudged at me. A thought, a whisper. Maybe it was time. Not to rage, not to beg, just to mark what happened with the kind of honesty that didn't need an apology. I opened Instagram, scrolled past filtered brunches and baby announcements, and found the photo I'd been avoiding. The one of me in my wedding dress, the sunlight catching just enough of the lace to make it glow. I cropped it slightly, making sure the 2 chairs behind me stayed visible. The name cards were still legible. Parents of the bride. I didn't add filters. I didn't touch up my face. I wrote the caption carefully. Respect was RSVP'd, but never showed. I hit post and put the phone down. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few likes, a quiet message or 2. But by noon, my inbox was flooding. Comments came in faster than I could read them. Some were shocked. Some shared their own stories. Some just wrote, "Thank you." By that evening, the photo had been reshared more than 1,000 times. Twitter caught it. Then Facebook. Someone made a side-by-side collage. Me in my wedding gown next to Bruno in his graduation cap. It wasn't cruel. It was devastating. People weren't laughing. They were angry. For me. By the end of the week, a producer from a local morning show reached out. "We'd love to have you on," she wrote. "Tell your story, if you're ready." Silas read the message with me, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. He didn't say much, just nodded and whispered, "If you want to, I'll be there." The studio was colder than I expected. Lights too bright, makeup heavier than I liked. But when the cameras rolled and the host leaned forward with her practiced sincerity, I didn't flinch. "What made you post that photo?" she asked. I looked straight into the lens. Not the host, not the audience, the lens. Because silence was never mutual, it was imposed, and I'm not carrying it anymore. They didn't expect that answer. You could hear it in the stillness that followed. We went to commercial, came back, and she offered the question I knew was coming. "Do you have an example of what happened?" I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. "My mother sent this message the morning of our wedding," I said, unfolding it slowly. "Bruno has his graduation today. He's worked so hard. We'll come by the next day." Gasps rippled across the audience. The host blinked rapidly, as if stalling. "They missed your wedding. For that." "They didn't miss it," I said, calm and clear. "They chose something else. Sometimes the truth doesn't need rage. It just needs a microphone." We closed with one final question. "What does family mean to you now?" I took a deep breath, glanced at Silas in the wings. "Family isn't about DNA. It's about presence. They chose theirs. I chose mine." Applause followed, not thunderous, but grounded. Real. When we stepped outside into the sunlight, a woman waiting near the studio door touched my arm gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "That wasn't just your story. It was mine, too." I nodded. Didn't cry. Just squeezed her hand once. They never said I was wrong. But this time, I didn't need them to. The next morning, I turned off every notification. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't. I'd said what needed to be said. There was nothing more to add. And yet, the world didn't seem done listening. Silas told me that afternoon, while I was restocking shelves at the shop. 3 million, he said gently. That's how many times the clip's been viewed. I blinked at him from across the counter. 3 million? He nodded. And counting. Messages poured in over the next few days. Some from strangers who shared stories eerily similar to mine. Some from people who just wrote, "I see you." A few from people I hadn't spoken to in years. High school friends, distant cousins. Not a single one from my parents. Not a missed call. Not a forwarded link. Just their absence, louder than ever. Then, one afternoon, Daria sent me a text. Just a screenshot. No commentary. Bruno was sitting proudly next to a box of high-end dog treats, his face featured on a new product line from a pet food company. Gifted by Purity Pet Foods. Juicer Family Champion, the label read. The caption was Colton's. Proud of our boy. Real loyalty runs four-legged. They didn't deny my truth. They monetized theirs. I printed the image and taped it into the journal, opposite the photo of Silas and me under the wedding arch. I stared at the contrast. One side celebration born of love, the other of branding and noise. Beneath it, I wrote in pen. They sent flowers to a dog. I got none, not even weeds. The following Sunday, I drove to their house. I didn't warn them. I didn't even check to see if they'd be home. I just needed to stand there one more time. The neighborhood looked the same. Cars parked neatly. Lawns trimmed like they were afraid of judgment. The kind of quiet that had nothing to do with peace. Their car was gone. Bruno's leash was missing from the hook by the door. Another event, no doubt. Another gathering where he would be the grandchild who didn't talk back. I stood at the mailbox for a full minute before reaching into my bag. I pulled out a small envelope containing one photo, our wedding cake. On the back, I'd written, "You missed this. Again." I slipped it into the box and walked away. The windows of the house were pristine, the curtains perfectly parted. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit, the family that used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't shake, but I felt something slip from me on that sidewalk, like a string I'd been gripping too tightly had finally snapped. On the drive home, I took the long route. Not to stall, just to breathe. It was quiet on the back roads, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but needed. I passed a small white building I'd seen 100 times but never noticed. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Support Group, Forgiving What You Can't Forget." I slowed the car, my foot hovering over the brake. But I didn't stop. I just looked. Once, twice, maybe one day, maybe not. But I knew something now, something simple. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was done waiting for apologies. They had left the door unlocked once. This time, I locked mine on purpose. That night, I didn't dream. I just slept, deep, uninterrupted, like my body had finally accepted there was nothing left to fight. When I woke, the sky outside was still silver. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, and pulled the blinds just enough to let in the light. There was no need to rush into the day. It would arrive either way. Later that afternoon, a package arrived on the doorstep. I hadn't ordered anything, and for a brief second, I thought maybe it was them. Maybe someone had remembered my existence in a tangible way. It was from Daria. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. "I made this for you, not for them. Sometimes we need to remember what we survived." I slipped the drive into my laptop and pressed play. The video wasn't long, 15 minutes, maybe less, but she had edited it with care. There was no dramatic music, no clever transitions, just raw moments. A shot of the chairs labeled "Parents of the Bride," still untouched. A close-up of my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted my veil. Silas, glancing at me with quiet steadiness. The soft applause when we kissed. There was no sound in parts, just stillness. I watched it once, then again. Not with a glass of wine, not through tears, just with breath and clarity. "It happened," I whispered. "And I was there, and I was enough." I didn't share the video. I uploaded it privately, unlisted, just for me. I didn't need comments or likes. I just needed it to exist somewhere outside my memory. 3 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, no handwriting on the envelope, just my name, typed in a simple font. Inside was a printed message. "I watched your interview. I cried. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was too familiar. Thank you for giving voice to what some of us never could." No name, no contact information, just validation. Sometimes strangers carry more of your heart than your own blood ever did. I held the letter for a long moment before slipping it into the drawer beside the wedding video and my vows. Later that week, a local women's group reached out. They had seen the interview. They wanted me to speak, share not just what had happened, but how I stood through it. At first, I said no. Then, the morning of the event, I woke with the sudden urge to go. Not for them, not even for me, but maybe for someone who hadn't found their voice yet. That night, before I left the house, I opened my journal and wrote, "I was not born to be the silence in someone else's memory." When I came home, I cleared out the drawer in the hallway cabinet. Inside, I placed 3 things: my handwritten vows, a printed still from the wedding video, the anonymous letter. Then I labeled it. For the version of me that forgot she mattered. I wasn't erasing them. I was finally outlining myself. 2 days after I labeled the drawer, I got tagged in a photo by a distant cousin I hadn't heard from since middle school. I almost ignored the notification, thought it was just another throwback post or baby shower picture. But my thumb hovered over the thumbnail long enough for the preview to pop. Maëlys and Vernon standing on either side of Bruno. He was wearing another novelty outfit. This one a denim jacket with the words "Grandpup" stitched across the back in red thread. Behind them was a picnic table lined with balloons, plastic cutlery, and a cake shaped like a bone. The caption read, "Our precious grandpup, the light of our lives." No mention of me. No glance toward the daughter they raised. No recognition that days earlier had marked what would have been our first wedding anniversary. I didn't flinch, not anymore. But I did save the image. Not to stew in it, not to cry, just to remember. Not because I needed the reminder, but because sometimes clarity deserves a frame of its own. That evening, I sat on the edge of the couch while Silas prepped dinner. I showed him the photo. He didn't ask questions. He didn't scold. He just poured me a cup of coffee and handed it over with quiet understanding. "They made their choice," I said, fingers wrapped around the mug. "I'm just glad it wasn't mine." He nodded once, said nothing. He knew silence sometimes meant more than comfort. Later that night, I stood in front of the gallery wall in our living room, the one I'd started building not long ago. Delora and I smiling at the wedding, a candid of Silas laughing, a shot of the bookstore's grand reopening. I reached up and removed every photo from my childhood. Each one came off the wall like it had overstayed its welcome. I didn't throw them out. I wasn't angry. I was ready. In their place, I hung 3 new frames. The first held our wedding photo. Just the 2 of us, silhouetted against the arch, the late sun warming our shoulders. The second, a picture taken beneath the oak tree behind our house. Silas was holding my hand. You could see Delora in the background, watching us with that proud, maternal softness she never tried to own, but always gave freely. The third frame was empty. Inside it, I placed a handwritten card that read, "To be filled by who shows up." I stepped back and stared at the arrangement. It wasn't symmetrical, it wasn't polished, but it felt right. Before bed, I returned to my journal, the one that had begun with receipts and slowly morphed into something else, a quiet catalog of becoming. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "You can't compete with a ghost, but you can choose not to become one." Then I closed the cover and locked the drawer. They made Bruno their legacy. I made peace mine. The afternoon sun poured through the kitchen windows like it had been invited. There was no official celebration planned, no anniversary, no birthday, no headline to warrant a gathering. But the house felt full in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Delora brought a lemon cake from her church group. Daria showed up with a bottle of sparkling cider and a camera slung over her shoulder, always ready to capture something worth keeping. 2 of our neighbors, Clara and George, brought folding chairs and a potato salad that didn't need compliments to matter. And Jamie, the little girl I mentored at the community center, handed me a flower she'd picked herself, bent stem and all. We sat in a circle in the backyard, paper plates balanced on laps, light conversation dancing between sips and bites. No one asked why we were there. They didn't need to. "Because we showed up," I said at one point, raising my glass just high enough. And sometimes that's reason enough. Later, when the cake had been sliced and the dishes rinsed, I asked them to come inside. Just for a moment. In the living room, above the mantel, hung a new framed collage. I hadn't told anyone about it. I wanted them to see it all at once. In the center was a photograph from our wedding, Silas pressing a kiss to my forehead, the world around us soft and blurred. To the left, a picture from the reception. Delora mid-laugh, Jamie licking icing off her fingers, Daria blurry in the background, adjusting her lens. The 2 front chairs in the image were still empty, but no one noticed. Or if they did, no one said a word. To the right, I had printed the cover of my journal, enlarged it slightly, and placed it in a simple white frame. Across the front, in silver lettering, "This is why I chose peace." Beneath the collage, etched into a wooden plaque that Silas had helped me mount, were the words. Even with empty chairs, I wasn't. Dolores stepped forward first. She didn't speak. She just touched the frame lightly, nodded once, and sat back down. No one clapped. No one cried. The silence held everything. Legacy doesn't need permission. It needs presence. I never heard from Melis or Vernon again. Not a call, not a postcard, not even a digital thumbs up. I found out through Colton's feed that Bruno had earned a new agility title. There was a ribbon, a video montage, a proud caption. I unfollowed them all that night. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I wrote one last letter. Addressed it to no one. Just them. It was short. Thank you for not coming. You made space for the ones who did. I didn't mail it. I tucked it into the back of the drawer, where the old photos used to live. The following week, I stood outside the community center, the same one I had once passed by without stopping. This time, I wasn't there for therapy. I was there to speak. The flyer read, "When showing up means starting over." Underneath, in smaller print, "Speaker, Cynthia Hale." I took the microphone with steady hands. No shaking, no second guessing. I used to think healing was loud, I began. But sometimes, it's just quiet choices made one after another. Like choosing to show up. Like choosing to stop waiting for someone else to. There was no applause break, just a room full of nods, some silent tears. A woman in the front row mouthed, "Thank you." Sometimes you don't get the apology. You get the power to never need it again. I didn't frame them out of my life. I just stopped hanging their version of me. Hi, I'm Adelaide. At 4:14 in the morning, I woke up to find 72 Saturn $19 or 19 gone from my bank account. When I called my mom, she didn't ask if I was okay. She screamed, "You owe this family!" My dad laughed and called it family help. I stayed quiet. I stopped paying their bills. 3 days later, he broke his leg, and they begged me to fix everything again. But how do you fix something that's been broken since childhood? What if love in my house was just a loan, and I'd been the repayment plan all along? Would you call that family, or would you call that theft? And what would you do if the people who raised you turned you into an ATM with a heartbeat? The heater was humming, but my skin felt like ice. I didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, I was tossing in bed, thinking about a late invoice. The next, my eyes shot open in the dark. I reached for my phone like it was muscle memory. It was 4:14 a.m., and there it was. Bold, bright, unblinking. $72,242.19 is withdrawn from your account. I stared at the screen. Blinking didn't change it. Refreshing the app didn't change it. I ran the math again. My stomach tightened into a knot so fast I thought I'd be sick. This had to be fraud. Identity theft, maybe. A mistake at the bank? My breath came in short bursts. I rubbed my temple, already feeling the sting of an oncoming headache. Before panic could spiral, I hit call. Mom picked up by the second ring. I could hear the TV in the background, some late-night infomercial, the clinking of ice in a glass. She sounded almost annoyed to answer. "Adelaide?" she said, her voice dry. "It's 4 in the morning." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Something's wrong. My account, $72,000 is gone. Did something happen? Did you—" Before I could finish, her tone changed completely. Sharp. Defensive. "Oh, don't start. We didn't steal anything. You owe this family, Adelaide. We raised you, fed you, paid your tuition. Or did you forget who helped you get where you are?" My throat closed. "That's not what I'm saying. You act like you're above us now, like we're leeches. But when your mama needed surgery, who stepped in? Not Cyrus, not your father, you. And you know what? That's how it should be. That's what family does." "But you didn't tell me," I whispered, feeling dizzy. "You would have said no," she snapped. "Don't act like you're some victim here. You make more in a month than we made in 5 years. Her words hit harder than the number on the screen. It wasn't the money. It was how easily she threw away my trust. I didn't expect an apology, But I didn't expect that. I hung up. For a moment, I stood frozen in the middle of my room. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't cold anymore. My mind raced, not just to what I'd lost, but to what I'd given over the years. Quietly, without conditions. I walked slowly to the kitchen. The tile floor was cold beneath my feet. I moved on autopilot, filling the kettle, lighting the stove, pulling out a mug. Each sound felt amplified, the gas clicking to life, the water beginning to boil, the spoon tapping the rim of the ceramic cup. I sat at the table, tea in hand, the steam warming my face. I didn't drink it, I just stared. I remembered the time Mom called me crying because she couldn't qualify for a loan. I was 24, no savings. But I signed the form anyway, co-signer. Just until we get back on our feet, she said. That was over a decade ago. I never even saw a repayment plan, just more requests, more guilt. Back then, I told myself that's what good daughters do. Now I wasn't so sure. A noise broke the silence, the gentle buzz of my phone still resting on the counter. I walked back over. My thumb hovered over the home button. I didn't call the bank, not yet. I opened my contacts and scrolled. Dad. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear. And that's when I heard my father's laughter before I even said a word. The moment his laugh hit my ear, something shifted in my chest. Not fear, not confusion. Something colder. It sounded like he was already mid-conversation, talking to someone in the room. I stayed quiet, waiting. You're calling about the money? You're always so dramatic, he said, the amusement still lingering in his voice. There was background noise, TV blaring some sports show, the clink of a beer bottle on glass. He hadn't even stepped out of the room to take my call. I imagined him, sitting in his worn recliner, one sock off, legs spread like he owned the world, smirking at his own cleverness. Dad, $72,000 just vanished from my account, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. Please tell me that wasn't you. Of course it was, he replied, without shame. Your mom needed help. Cyrus's truck's been dead 2 months. We were behind on the house. Don't act surprised. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter with my free hand. Why didn't you ask me? He let out a half scoff, half laugh. Ask? Since when do parents need permission from their kid to survive? I closed my eyes for a second, letting his words sink in. It's not about permission, I said. It's about respect. It's my money, my work. Your work? He said, and I could hear him shifting in his seat. Don't get high and mighty. You wouldn't even be where you are without us. Who do you think paid for those fancy college applications? Your mom gave up her career so you could get yours. Her career was part-time receptionist, Dad, I said, instantly regretting how it came out. Not because it wasn't true, because I knew how it would land. And right on cue, he barked, There it is. The ungrateful little princess finally speaks. There was a click, a mousepad, a keyboard tapping. Then his voice again, smug this time. Funny thing, he said. I'm looking at your old spreadsheet. You remember the one you made me? With all the bills and login stuff? My stomach dropped. I still use this MacBook, by the way. Great gift, he added, and I could practically hear his smirk. That laptop had been a birthday present. 2 years ago, top of the line, paid in full. I'd saved up for months to surprise him. And now he was using it to scroll through my finances, my systems, my passwords, the budget I'd taught him how to read. You gave me the tools, he said, as if reading my silence. Why are you so shocked I used them? I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because there was nothing left to say. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even pretending to be sorry. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the mug of tea still untouched on the counter. I wasn't shaking anymore. My body had gone still, like every muscle was conserving energy. Not for flight, but for something slower, something exact. I walked back to my desk, turned on my own laptop. It lit up with that familiar blue screen, and I stared at it for a moment before opening my financial dashboard. I went line by line. Cell plan, 6 active lines. Mortgage, on a property I hadn't lived in since I was 19. Streaming services, 3, all signed in from Boise, not my address. Cyrus's student loan, set on autopay from my secondary account. Health insurance, 2 dependents, both aged over 60. It wasn't just money, it was the assumption of access. Like my worth in this family had been absorbed and automated. I wasn't the daughter, I was the structure. I highlighted the whole list, mouse hovering, click. Edit settings, click. Billing preferences, click. I didn't yell, I just started clicking cancel. I sat back in my chair, the cursor still blinking on the cancellation screen. My fingers lingered for a while, hovering over the last dependent name. I didn't hit confirm, not yet. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I did, there would be no more buffer between me and their silence. And it wasn't just silence I feared. It was what would come after. The next morning passed quietly. I made coffee, did laundry, even went for a walk around the block. Anything to not check my inbox. But by the afternoon, curiosity gave way to inevitability. When I opened the mailbox downstairs, a thick white envelope sat wedged in the back, like it had been waiting for me to come claim it. No return address, just my name, written in my mother's handwriting. Neat, confident, familiar in the way a chain can feel familiar if you've worn it long enough. I carried it upstairs, laid it on the counter, stared at it while I unloaded the groceries I didn't remember buying. It sat there, unmoved, until the light outside faded and I realized I'd been avoiding it all day. Eventually, I tore the top carefully, not in a rush, not with anger, just enough. 4 pages, handwritten, front and back. It started with, "I don't know what's gotten into you," a classic Vera line. That's how every disagreement began, by erasing the premise that I might have a valid reason. Then came the usual refrain. "We fed you, we sacrificed, we didn't ask for thanks. But this," she wrote, "feels like a betrayal." The letter unfolded like a checklist of everything she had ever done that resembled parenting, each moment reframed as a debt I had forgotten to pay. The piano lessons I asked to quit after 6 months? That was a wasted investment. The $300 prom dress I saved up for myself? Bought with our water bill unpaid? Don't let money blind you to what matters most. Blood. I read that line twice, once as her daughter, once as the woman I had become. There wasn't a single apology, not a line acknowledging how they took from me without asking. Just a narrative designed to pull me back in by guilt-wrapping memory in selective truth. I folded the pages and set them down like they might shatter if I handled them wrong. A sudden draft pulled my attention to the window. Outside, it was quiet. A few porch lights across the street flicked on, one by one. A neighbor's screen door banged shut, then silence. I pulled my cardigan tighter. That letter shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Not because of what she said, but because of what she left out. No mention of the money, no explanation, no justification, just entitlement, just framing, just a revision of history that made me the villain for finally saying enough. I sat down again, this time with a glass of water. The tea had gone cold hours ago. And in that quiet, another memory surfaced, one I hadn't visited in years. I was 16. It was late November. Cold. Our power had been shut off after weeks of, "Not now," and, "We'll call tomorrow." I remember Mom sitting at the kitchen table, with the past due notice in one hand and her forehead in the other. Cyrus had borrowed the car and wasn't answering his phone. I had just gotten my first job, part-time, sweeping up hair at a salon after school. My first paycheck had been $62 and change. That afternoon, I walked into the utility office and paid it. Not all of it, but enough to turn the lights back on. That night, Mom cried. She hugged me and said, "You're my strong girl. You always have been." I used to think that was love. Now I see it for what it was. A handoff, a quiet assignment. Strong girl was just a more palatable way of saying, "You're in charge now." I got up, walked over to the drawer, and slid the letter inside without reading it again. I didn't need to, it had done its job. I turned toward my desk and opened my laptop again. No hesitation this time. I clicked into the health insurance tab, hovered over the dependent section, and just like that, I clicked remove. Not out of spite, not to hurt them, just to stop hurting me. The screen flashed back to my dashboard. There was no dramatic music, no blinking red lights, just a quiet confirmation box that asked, "Are you sure?" Like it thought maybe I'd change my mind. I clicked yes. Then I closed the laptop. The room felt oddly still, like it was waiting to see if I'd undo what I'd just done. But nothing came rushing in to stop me. No calls, no apologies, no thunderclap of regret. Just silence. And it was the first time that silence didn't terrify me. The next morning, I woke up early without an alarm. Light seeped in through the blinds. It was still gray out, probably not even 7 a.m. I moved slowly, making my way to the kitchen, flicking on the light as I went. The house was cold but manageable, quiet, familiar in a different way now. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and sat at the dining table. I opened my laptop again and signed in. A list of recurring payments stared back at me like a ledger of decisions I never fully consented to. Mortgage, cell phone plan, gas, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify. Some of these I didn't even remember setting up. Some I thought had already been canceled years ago. I went down the list, one item at a time, no rush. I read each label, each last date charged, like I was saying goodbye, not to the service, but to the lie attached to it. Cyrus's car payment. I covered it after his second DUI. He was supposed to pay me back once he got that marketing job. He never got the job. But he still drove the truck. I removed it. The family's Netflix account. Everyone had their own profile. Even the grandkids. I'd been footing that bill since my last promotion. When I stopped watching, no one noticed. I canceled it. Lowell's old iPad had a subscription for the Wall Street Journal. I added that for him when he said he wanted to stay informed. He never once opened it, but it billed me every month. I shut it down. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel powerful. I felt clean, like someone finally wiping down a counter that had been sticky for years, but no one ever mentioned it. It wasn't about punishment. It was about finally choosing not to fund my own erasure. My phone didn't buzz. My inbox didn't fill with concerned messages. The world didn't stop because I stopped paying. That was the most surreal part. How little the silence pushed back. By noon, I'd cleared everything. My balance wasn't huge, but it stopped bleeding. I transferred what was left into a new savings account under a different bank. One no one knew about. I went for a walk after that. The sky had turned that pale blue it always does before a rain. My jacket wasn't warm enough, but I didn't turn back. I needed air more than comfort. I passed the same mailbox I'd collected Mom's letter from. It was empty today. Back home, I microwaved leftover soup and stood in the kitchen, eating it with a spoon straight from the container. My appetite had returned. Another sign something was healing. Later, I checked the calendar. A sticky note still clung to the edge of my monitor. Mom's birthday, Sunday. I peeled it off and dropped it in the trash without a second thought. Then I opened the shared insurance account again. I had removed myself from being their financial safety net, but one thing remained. My name still listed Vera and Lowell as dependents. I stared at it, knowing exactly what that meant. If either of them needed surgery or medication, I would be the one footing it by default. I clicked into the profile. Options appeared. Edit coverage. Remove dependent. Again, the screen asked me, "Are you sure?" Yes. Click. The tab closed. I sat back and waited for a wave of guilt, of doubt, of that whispering voice that said, "You're being selfish." But all I felt was the quiet confidence that I had done the most honest thing I could. And 3 days later, just as I was finishing laundry and sipping a tea by the window, The phone rang. Mom's name lit up the screen. I stared at the screen, watching her name pulse for a moment, then disappear. The call rang out, but I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, not because I was punishing anyone, but because I already knew what was coming. A plea, not a conversation. A demand wrapped in a crisis. Instead of picking up, I waited. 2 minutes later, the voicemail alert appeared. I let it sit. I didn't open it right away. I walked to the kitchen, rinsed out my tea mug, dried it with a towel, folded it over the oven handle, fed the cat. Only then did I pick up the phone, thumb hovering over the message. I played it. Her voice was frantic, that breathless kind of panic she only summoned when it benefited her urgency. "Adelaide," she said, barely pausing. "Your father fell. It's bad. He broke his leg. We're at the ER. They won't operate unless we put something down. Insurance, cash, anything. They said we need someone listed. Please, we don't have anyone else. Please call back." I played it again. I sat down at the edge of my bed. Not crying. Not even blinking. How many times had I been the only one left? When Cyrus skipped court dates. When Vera needed help picking up her prescriptions but couldn't remember the pharmacy name. When Dad got pulled over and they needed someone sober to pick up the car. The answer had always been me. Until now. I set the phone down face first and stared at the wall. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was finally mine. By evening, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long blue-gray shadows through the blinds. I made dinner, nothing fancy, just some leftover pasta, and sat at the small kitchen table, letting the quiet stretch. I didn't check the phone again until nearly 9. No new calls, just the voicemail still sitting there. I opened social media more out of routine than curiosity, but the second post on my feed made my stomach tighten. A cousin I barely spoke to had shared a photo from the hospital chapel. The caption read, "Praying hard for Uncle Lowell. Surgery tonight. Please send love." Surgery. So he'd already been admitted. They'd figured it out, found a way. I hadn't been updated. No text, no call, not even a group message. They had only needed me until they didn't. And somehow I felt lighter. I shut off the phone completely. Not airplane mode, power down. Then I stood and went to the window. Outside, it had started to drizzle. The kind of soft rain that didn't announce itself, but still left the pavement dark and clean. I sipped water and stood there for a long time, watching headlights move across the street and disappear again. When I finally turned in for the night, I slept better than I expected. Deep, still sleep. In the morning, while coffee brewed, I reached for my phone again. Powered it up. It buzzed with system updates, then notifications from missed messages. None from Mom. None from Cyrus. But I did notice something else. The family group chat had a new name. Where it used to say, Family Support, it now read, Emergency Coordination, Admin, Cyrus. My name was no longer in the list of members. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt. I just stared at it for a moment, then pressed Leave Chat. The screen went blank. And that's when the wall began to take shape. After I left the group chat, I didn't feel a sense of closure. I didn't feel defiant, or relieved, or even sure I'd done the right thing. I just sat there, staring at the empty screen, watching the space where their names used to be. No pings, no arguments, no passive-aggressive comments. Just a bland, silent rectangle. Like a door closing softly behind me. Not slammed, not locked. Just closed. Quietly. That was the unsettling part. How nothing really happened after I left. Nothing except the quiet. The silence in the room settled in a way that felt unfamiliar. It wasn't oppressive. It didn't weigh me down the way tension usually does. It also wasn't light or freeing. It was something in between. Still. Balanced. A neutral quiet that felt less like an absence and more like a presence in itself. I got up slowly, wandered toward the window, placed my hand flat against the glass, and let the cold seep into my skin. The world outside looked so profoundly indifferent. A neighbor dragged a rake through fallen leaves with lazy motions. A kid zipped past on a scooter, hoodie half on, half off. Someone down the street unloaded groceries from a trunk. Normal life. Unbothered. Detached. Moving on. I walked to the kitchen and boiled water. Picked chamomile without thinking. I didn't even like it that much. Just associated it with calm, with something soothing, something soft. I sat at the table, holding the mug with both hands, not drinking yet. I opened my phone and started scrolling. Not reading, not absorbing. Just scrolling to scroll, like the movement alone might trick my brain into feeling occupied. That's when I saw it. Mom had posted again. Public, of course. She never used the private setting unless she wanted to send a recipe or a chain prayer. Everything else was performative. Open. Loud without shouting. Her post was simple. Just a few words. We do everything for our children, but some forget who loved them first. And under that, an old photo. Me, maybe 10 years old, frosting on my chin and a missing front tooth, beaming in that unself-conscious way kids do. Behind me stood Vera, her hands resting firmly on my shoulders like she was claiming me, like she owned the moment. I remember the cake, vaguely. I don't remember feeling particularly loved that day. Just surrounded. Watched. The comments rolled in like clockwork. You deserve better, Vera. Kids these days, no appreciation for sacrifice. She owes you everything. Nobody tagged me. They didn't need to. Everyone who mattered knew who it was about. That was my mother's talent, saying everything while pretending she hadn't said anything at all. The dig was always wrapped in just enough ambiguity to make you look petty if you responded. So I didn't. I didn't like the post. I didn't comment. I didn't message her to ask what it meant. I just sat there for a moment, phone still in hand, then stood up and walked to the office closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down an old accordion file I hadn't touched in years. It was heavy with time. The edges frayed, tabs curling inward. Inside was the paper trail of my role in the family. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a support system. Receipts, loan paperwork, statements, medical bills, tuition stubs, insurance summaries. All the things I'd quietly paid, covered, or handled while they claimed I was selfish or distant or too independent. For the next 4 hours, I printed. Not everything. I didn't need to prove the totality of it. Just enough to show the pattern. A single page for the electricity bill I covered in 2017 when their lights got shut off. A medical copay receipt from 2019 when Cyrus slipped on the ice and they didn't have urgent care coverage. Health insurance premium statements for Vera and her husband Lowell, 7 years' worth. The tuition payments I made for my nephew to attend community college. A credit card summary showing a balance I'd cleared not once, but 4 separate times. I built a timeline, 1 column for each year, taped neatly across the living room wall. Color-coded, yellow for health, blue for education, orange for utilities and debt. Each sheet of paper was a line in a quiet biography they never cared to read. 8 years. 8 years of stepping in, of saying nothing, of being the safety net while they painted me as selfish. It looked like a financial breakdown, but to me, it was a portrait. A story told through numbers, highlighted ink, and taped down proof. It wasn't revenge, it was record-keeping. A way of saying, this happened, when memory becomes a battleground. Ava stopped by, dropping off a sweater I'd left in her car. She knocked lightly, and when I opened the door, she took 2 steps inside and froze. Her eyes scanned the wall, then slowly found mine. You did all that? She asked softly. I nodded. I didn't explain, didn't expand. Did you ever tell them? She asked, cautious but curious. I folded my arms. They never asked, I said. They just expected. She didn't argue, didn't try to offer comfort. She just stood there with me, taking it in, reading silently, seeing the version of me that I'd kept tucked beneath competence and composure. After a while, she hugged me, not for comfort, but solidarity. After she left, I took a photo, just one, wide enough to capture the full wall, the full scope of quiet labor they never acknowledged. I didn't send it to my mother, or to Vera, or anyone. I emailed it to myself, gave it a subject line, proof for when I forget. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not angry, not heartbroken, not even tired, just clear, like something had finally clicked into place. Not a snap, not a rupture, just alignment, truth meeting surface. There was a message to Vera I'd drafted weeks ago, started with, "I'm not trying to hurt you," and ended with, "I just need space." I opened it, read it twice, then hit delete. She didn't need to understand me. I finally did. Out of instinct, I opened the family chat app one last time, just to see. Not because I expected anything, but because old habits take time to break, still not added back. I closed it, and this time, not with sadness, not with bitterness, with finality. A few hours later, they renamed me in that chat, not blocked, not erased, just renamed. Like they were rewriting the story again. But I had mine now, and I had the proof. The next morning, I reached for my phone without thinking. Habit, not hope. A swipe, a tap, and there it was. The group chat. But it didn't look the same. The title had changed. Where it once read Family Support, it now said Drama Girl. Cyrus was listed as the new admin. It took me a second. Not because I was confused, but because I wasn't. I knew exactly what it meant. They hadn't kicked me out. That would have been too direct. Too honest. No. They kept me in long enough to rename me, to mock me, to send a message without sending a message. I clicked into the chat. A flurry of messages greeted me. Should we even try again with her? Someone's got to grow up eventually. A photo of my wall of receipts, cropped, edited, reposted with laughing emojis. She thinks she's the IRS, one of them wrote. Another replied, more like the queen of overreaction. Screenshots of my old texts, pleas I'd sent months ago, ones I barely remembered, were now joke material. Apparently, I'd been rebranded. I hadn't just been excluded. I'd been made into the punchline. I didn't reply. I didn't send a single word. My thumb hit record. Quietly, I scrolled, capturing everything. Screen by screen, message by message. Then I tapped Leave Group. No confirmation needed. The air in my apartment felt heavy. Not like grief. Not even like rage. More like recognition. They hadn't betrayed me now. They'd been doing it in increments for years. This was just the first time they'd done it in writing. My phone buzzed again before I even set it down. It was my lawyer. I answered with a short, "Hey," already bracing for whatever came next. "You have a minute?" she asked, no small talk. "I got something weird in a cross-check. Your social security number was used in a recent policy update through Northwest Health." I froze. "I haven't signed anything in over a year," I said. "Nothing with them." "That's the thing," she continued. "A policy was updated last month, added a new dependent, someone named Mallory Jean Calhoun, 19, claims to be a second cousin." I closed my eyes. Mallory. I'd seen her name pop up at family gatherings, Cyrus's kid from that relationship he never really claimed. They called her Mally and joked about how she always needed a little help. Apparently, help now came in the form of my identity. "Was it approved?" I asked. "It was, through your old employer portal, still active." "And who requested it?" "Vera," she said. "Her name's on the digital trail." I let out a long breath, not surprised, just done. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my name. Later that day, I didn't text anyone in the family. I didn't call. Instead, I drafted one message, short and cold. I sent it to Cyrus. "This isn't a family issue anymore. It's legal now." No response. I opened every social account, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. I blocked each of them, one by one. Mom, Cyrus, even Lowell. No drama, no rage, just closure. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window again. The air had a crisp bite to it, like early fall had finally arrived. I opened a folder on my desktop. It had been titled Receipts. I renamed it Legal Backup. Inside, I dragged over the screen recordings, the insurance file, the chat logs. I saved a copy on the cloud. Then I added a final document, a blank text file titled Reminder. In it, I typed, "They didn't just erase your presence, they repurposed it." Then I hit save. No more drafts, no more explaining myself, just facts, just proof. I labeled the entire folder, Evidence, in case I forget the truth. The next morning came without drama. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the usual neighborhood routine waking up around me. I poured myself a cup of coffee, still in my robe, and opened the blinds. The sky was that dull gray of late fall. No storms, no sunshine, just static. I hadn't planned to open my laptop, but I did. My lawyer had forwarded a batch of documents overnight, a mix of insurance statements and archived financial files from a few years back. She flagged one page in particular, a loan application, dated 5 years ago. My name was listed as the co-signer. I stared at the signature at the bottom right corner. Neat, precise, and absolutely not mine. I zoomed in, staring at the way the D curled. I've never curled my D. I don't even write in cursive. Whoever did it tried to mimic my blocky penmanship, but they didn't get it right. Not close. "Vera," I whispered, not in shock, but in confirmation. Back then, I had taken a 2-week trip for work. Out of town. I remembered calling to check in, and Mom had mentioned needing help with some paperwork. That was probably the window she used. It didn't feel like discovery. It felt like final evidence. Not new betrayal. Just the oldest one, finally under a spotlight. They hadn't just used my money. They had forged my identity to access more of it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt done. For years, I had been patching the same leak over and over, silently, hoping that if I just fixed it one more time, the roof would hold. But now I could see. The house was never built for me. It was only built with me. I opened a new email, addressed it to Vera, Cyrus, and Lowell. Subject, final statement. Body. From 2015 to 2023, I supported this family. I paid bills, I signed documents, I sacrificed silently. In return, my trust was traded, my consent ignored, and my name repurposed. Effective immediately, I am severing all emotional, financial, and legal ties. You are no longer authorized to use my identity, my accounts, or my presence. I do not owe loyalty where respect is absent. I do not owe love where harm lives. I do not owe you. I BCC'd my attorney. Then I clicked Send. I closed the browser and sat for a moment, letting the stillness stretch out around me. No alert chimed, no call came through. I moved deliberately through the rest of the day. One by one, I shut down every account connected to them. Hulu, shared cell plan, the autopay for the garbage service at their house, the Amazon Prime account they never paid for, but always used. Each click was a thread snapping clean. I transferred the last $74 out of the joint banking account and closed it. I logged out of everything. I even changed my Wi-Fi password. Not because they had it, but because I needed a fresh start in every small corner I could control. Then I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and deleted the group labeled Calhoun Family. My thumb hovered over each name. One swipe, delete, another, delete. When I was done, I put the phone face down and opened the window, letting the wind cut through the room for a moment. The chill didn't bother me. It felt right. I didn't stand there waiting for a reaction. I wasn't expecting one. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if they would reach out. And then there was a knock at the door. Firm. Not frantic. I didn't move at first. Just listened. Then another knock. I walked to the peephole. Elias, standing there with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes down, like he wasn't sure he should be there. I didn't open the door right away. I stood behind it, my hand resting on the doorknob, listening to the quiet weight of his presence on the other side. Not moving, not pacing, just there, waiting. I took a breath, unlatched the lock, and pulled the door open slowly. Elias looked up. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. He held a small brown paper bag in one hand and shrugged like he was just passing through town and thought, why not stop by? I didn't come to fix anything, he said. Just to sit. His voice was low, uncomplicated, real. I nodded, stepped aside, and let him in. No hug, no ceremony. He walked in and took off his shoes without asking, set the bag on the counter. I watched him pull out 2 peaches, a sleeve of crackers, and a glass bottle of sparkling water, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I wasn't sure what you had in, he said. I pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet and put on the kettle. Not much, I replied. We sat on the floor in the living room. No lights, just the late afternoon sun bleeding through the window slats. He handed me a peach. I took it without a word. After a while, I asked quietly, do they know you're here? He chewed a piece of cracker, then shrugged again. I don't care. He looked at me, finally meeting my eyes. I see you. I always did. That broke something small in me, not in a dramatic way, but like a release valve easing the pressure I didn't know was still there. I set the peach down and leaned back against the wall. I'm sorry for pulling away. He shook his head. You didn't pull away. You pulled yourself out. I looked at him sideways. He was 28 now, taller than I remembered, but still with that soft, quiet weight to him. Always listening, more than speaking. You were the only one holding it all together, he said. I saw it. I just didn't know how to name it back then. You were a kid, I said. Maybe, but I wasn't blind. We sat in silence for a bit, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just necessary. I thought being good meant letting people take what they needed, I admitted. I thought it meant staying quiet so everyone else could stay comfortable. He tilted his head. And now? I think being good means not setting yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. He smiled at that, small but real. I brought you something else, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. What is it? He handed it to me. It was a photo, me, holding him on the front steps of our old house, years ago. I was maybe 12. He was 4. My arm was around him like a shield. Dad kept it in the garage, he said. I took it before he tossed it with the rest. I swallowed. Hard. He didn't say, Mom's sorry, or they're changing. He didn't try to defend them. He didn't ask me to come back or explain why he'd waited so long. He just said, you're still my sister. That never changed. I didn't cry. I nodded. The kind of nod that says, I'm still here too. We talked for a while longer, about nothing, about everything. Then he stood and gathered his things. I walked him to the door. He hugged me tightly before he left. Thank you for surviving, he whispered. I stood there long after he walked down the hall, letting the quiet return. Then I closed the door. Not with fear, not with finality, but with choice. Later that evening, I made myself a cup of tea. The steam fogged my glasses as I stood in front of the wall of receipts. I reached for one, the electricity bill from 2017, and pulled it down. I folded it in half and dropped it into the trash. Not all of them, just one. I didn't need the whole wall to remember what I'd done. I just needed to remember who I'd become. Hello, my name's Elira. And last week, at our family reunion, my sister stood up in front of everyone and said, you're not welcome anymore. You're not family. But that wasn't the beginning. That was just the first time they said it out loud. They'd already cut me out of photos, replaced my name on legal papers, passed around group chats calling me the ATM girl. They didn't just forget me, they rewrote me. And now I'm asking myself, was I ever really part of this family? Or just a role they needed filled? I arrived a little early, maybe 15 minutes before the official start. The yard smelled like cut grass and citronella candles. A row of white folding chairs curved around long tables draped in linen. Name cards fluttered in the breeze, pinned under clear plates and silverware polished just enough for a picture. I scanned the lineup of names. Marvin's card was front and center, of course. Aunt Judy had hers right beside Marvine's, and even the cousin who hadn't shown up in 4 years had a spot. But there was no Elira. Not at the head table, not even by the cooler, not anywhere. I stood there for a few seconds, pretending to reread each name. My hands were dry, but I kept wiping them against the sides of my dress like I'd touched something sticky. Maybe they forgot. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Must have been a printing error, Marvine said as she passed behind me. Her voice was dipped in sweet tea, but had that sharp edge only she knew how to deliver with a smile. You'll manage, right? I nodded once, then walked past everyone and sat down at the furthest end of the yard, where an extra chair leaned unevenly near the trash bin and a stack of spare napkins. Nobody said anything, not a single, "Hey, glad you made it." Just half smiles and raised chins from across the lawn. The food was good. Marvine always went all out for optics. Glazed ham, sweet potatoes with toasted marshmallows, deviled eggs with paprika lined like trophies. I ate just enough to keep my hands busy. The conversations buzzed around me. Wedding plans, new jobs, a baby on the way. No one asked about my life, and I stopped expecting them 2 years ago. After the plates were cleared, I saw it coming, the shift in energy. Marvane clinked her glass with a butter knife, the sound crisp and practiced. Conversations died down. Everyone turned their chairs toward the makeshift platform she stood on, microphone in hand. I didn't expect a toast, but I didn't expect what came next either. "We've talked," she said, holding her wine like she was about to bless the room. "And we've agreed. Elira is no longer part of this family." It landed like a slap, but no one flinched. A few chuckled nervously. Uncle Trey adjusted his collar. My mother looked at the tablecloth. And someone, I don't even know who, actually clapped. I stayed seated, my hands in my lap, my wine glass untouched. I waited for someone to interrupt her. To say it was a joke, but it wasn't. And the worst part? It felt rehearsed. Scripted. Like this was the scene they'd been preparing for, and I'd walked right into it. Marvine continued, still smiling. This family is about unity, about mutual respect. And some people, some choices, just don't fit that anymore. It's time we stop pretending otherwise. No one looked at me. Not really, not even Mom. Especially not Mom. I thought about saying something, anything, but the words turned to stone in my throat. Instead, I listened to the clink of forks being placed gently on plates, to the wine being poured like nothing had happened. After a while, the applause died down. Conversation resumed, shallow and strained. Someone asked about the price of mulch, another about school schedules. And just like that, my exile was absorbed into the hum of family normalcy. I pushed my chair back slowly, letting the legs scrape the wooden deck. No one turned around. Walking away from the table, I passed the photographer lining up the cousins for a group shot. He asked, "You want in?" out of habit. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm just passing through." The camera clicked anyway, capturing a memory I wouldn't be in. As I rounded the corner of the house, I felt the sweat pooling under my collar. Not from heat, but from stillness, like I'd been holding my breath for a decade and just realized it. I kept walking, through the side yard, past the carport, until the laughter faded behind me. I reached the gate that led out to the driveway and paused. Last year, I made a scrapbook, hand-cut pages, captions written in silver ink, laminated photos from every branch of our family tree. I mailed it 2 weeks early. At the time, I told myself it was a gesture of goodwill. Looking back, I realize it was more like a peace offering wrapped in silence. No one ever brought it up. No one displayed it. It just disappeared. Like me. I stood by the gate longer than I should have. The porch lights flickered on behind me. I heard someone shout for more ice. And someone else laughed, loud, throaty. Maybe it was Aunt Judy. Maybe it wasn't. Did it matter? Not anymore. I turned away from the gate slowly, not because I was unsure of leaving, but because I wasn't sure I'd ever come back. The sun was dipping lower, throwing long shadows across the backyard. I walked back toward the event, blending into the edges where no one would notice me. Not that anyone had before. I wasn't ready to go yet. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me walk out like I didn't belong. If I was going to leave, it would be on my terms. For now, I sat in the back row, out of frame, but still in the room. They'd set up a projector under the old sycamore tree. Someone dimmed the lights, and a digital slideshow flickered onto the hanging white sheet. The title screen said, "Family Through the Years." Soft music hummed from the Bluetooth speakers. Piano, sentimental, predictable. The first few photos were black and white. My parents on their wedding day, Uncle Rick in Vietnam, baby pictures of Marvine dressed in frilly bonnets. Then came the 90s. Theme parks, beach trips, Thanksgiving dinners, faces I remembered, moments I hadn't thought of in years. But none of them included me. Not one. Even in group shots where I remembered standing, I'd been edited out, or the photo was cropped so tightly I didn't exist in the frame. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I'd look up and see my 12th birthday, or the Christmas where I saved the dinner after the oven went out. But nothing came. It was as if I'd never been born. I leaned toward Branwen, who sat 2 seats away, fiddling with the condensation on her glass. "Did you help pick these?" I asked quietly. She looked over, startled. No. Marvine and your mom handled everything. They said it was easier that way." Easier to erase me, apparently. I didn't cry. I just sat back in the metal chair, the legs sinking into the grass, and watched people laugh and comment on the slides like they were watching a documentary about a world I never lived in. "You remember that trip to Gatlinburg?" someone said. "Alira was with us, right?" Marvine didn't even turn her head. "No, she stayed home that year. Too busy with college, I think." That was a lie. I'd been the one who booked the cabin, who drove everyone up when Dad's car broke down. I still remembered carrying Marvine's suitcase because she said her back hurt. But sure, rewrite the script. The screen moved on to wedding photos, including ones from Marvin's big day. Her husband, Deshaun, had his arm around her, grinning like he'd won the lottery. My stomach knotted, but I kept my expression neutral. I hadn't seen Deshaun since the day he vanished from my life. No goodbye, no closure. We had dated for 4 years. We talked about marriage, kids, getting a dog. Then one morning, he ghosted me. 2 months later, I heard from a mutual friend that he and Marvine were a thing. A year later, they were married. Mom said nothing. No one did. Now, here he was, crossing the lawn toward me with a glass of iced tea in hand, wearing a beige linen shirt like he was straight out of a vacation brochure. "I didn't think you'd show," he said casually. I looked up. "Neither did I." He chuckled, awkward. "You look good." I nodded. "I know." He stood there a moment too long, like he thought this was going to be a moment. I didn't give him one. "How's married life?" I asked, voice even. "It's, busy. We've got the little one now. Keeps us on our toes." I raised an eyebrow. "Glad to hear you're finally capable of commitment." He blinked, then smiled too wide. "Always had that fire, huh?" "No," I said, finishing my drink. I just finally stopped confusing silence with kindness. Before he could respond, I walked past him toward the drink table, where Branwen was pretending to pour more lemonade into a half-full cup. "That was something," she muttered. I glanced sideways. "You knew?" Her eyes dropped. I didn't know it started with you, but once I saw them together, I didn't ask questions. Must have been easier that way, I said, my voice clipped. A few minutes later, while the slideshow still flickered behind us, Branwen leaned in again. You know that scrapbook you sent last year? I turned to her slowly. Mom tossed it, she said, voice low. Said it was too self-centered. Too many photos of you. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I'd spent hours putting that together, cropping, gluing, captioning. I'd even included people I hadn't spoken to in years. Not because I craved attention, but because I thought maybe if they saw the memories laid out in front of them, they'd remember how much I'd loved them. Turns out, love isn't always enough to make someone look your way. I stood there for a long while, surrounded by a crowd that had decided I was disposable. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was something colder than that, something quieter. I wasn't sad they forgot me. I was done reminding them I existed. I stayed until the last frame of the slideshow faded into black, not because I wanted to, but because walking out would have made it look like I couldn't handle it, like I was being too sensitive, which, in this family, was the same as being unstable. Back at my car, the air had cooled just enough to roll the windows down. I sat in the driver's seat, keys untouched in the ignition, staring at the silence in front of me. A part of me wanted to drive straight back to the motel, take a hot shower, and let the sting of the evening dissolve. But I hesitated. Something in my chest felt unfinished. Then my phone buzzed. At first I thought it was a generic alert. But when I glanced down, I saw it. A message from a group chat I didn't recognize. Legacy Core? I frowned. The only group threads I was part of were work-related or painfully dry family announcements. This one wasn't either. I tapped into the thread and scrolled. The first message was from Marvine. Did Elira actually show up wearing blue? Like, read the room? Then another from Deshawn. She thinks she's classy but walks around like she owns the place. Clydia chimed in. She always wanted to be the martyr. Just give her a check and she'll go away. And then the kicker. ATM girl strikes again. I kept scrolling. My stomach turned. There were screenshots of emails I'd sent when Dad was in hospice, texts I thought had been private, twisted out of context. One message, from a cousin I'd trusted since childhood, read, She's not generous. She's guilty. That's the only reason she ever helps. It wasn't just mockery. It was a collection, a dossier, like they had been saving every piece of me to pick apart behind a digital curtain. I don't know who added me by mistake, or if it was intentional, a passive-aggressive jab dressed as an oops. But I screenshotted every word. Quietly, carefully, like someone documenting a crime scene no one else believed was real. I didn't text back. I didn't even leave the group. I just sat there, letting the glow of the screen dim against the dusk, letting the mask peel off without resistance. I drove to the motel in near silence. The usual classic rock station felt too loud, too out of place. When I got to the room, I threw my bag onto the bed, slipped off my shoes, and turned on the lamp beside the window. The light hit a box on the dresser, one I hadn't touched in years. It was an old keepsake box my Aunt Gail had given me when I graduated college. I'd left it at her place years ago after moving states, and she must have dropped it off here when she heard I'd be staying. I hadn't expected anything inside to matter anymore. But when I opened it, there it was. A gold necklace, thin chain, slightly tarnished from time. The charm used to read my name, Elira, etched in delicate script. Now the metal was scratched, almost buffed out entirely, but the curve of the E was still faintly visible. And I knew that necklace, because Marvine wore it at brunch. She had it tucked into her blouse, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, but I had seen it. The same charm, same clasp, same chain, only now with no name. I held it in my palm, turning it slowly. My chest didn't ache, it just settled, like a question had finally been answered. That necklace was mine. It had been mine since I was 15. Dad had it custom made when I won the county spelling bee. He said, "It's not about the trophy, it's about remembering who you are when no one's clapping." I guess someone decided I didn't need to remember anymore. After a while, I set the necklace down and pulled an old notebook from the bottom of the box. I hadn't opened it in years. It still had a coffee stain on the back cover and a folded receipt stuck between the pages from a diner in North Carolina, my first solo road trip. Inside, about halfway through, was a journal entry I barely remembered writing. It said, "If they only call you when something breaks, you're not a daughter, you're a service." I read it aloud to the quiet room, my voice flat, steady, not broken, not bitter, just clear. I'd known. Even then. I turned off the lamp and lay on top of the blanket, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The air conditioner clicked on, low and humming, the only sound in the room. Tomorrow, I'd see them again. Pretend I didn't know what I knew. Not yet. Not all at once. Because letting truth out too fast would let them pretend they didn't hear it. And I wasn't about to give them that. By morning, the room was still cool and quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't invite rest but dares you to act. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through old messages, staring at the familiar names that now read like strangers. My phone felt heavier than it should have, like it knew what I was about to do. I opened the group chat, the one labeled Family Thread, not the secret one they thought I didn't know about. This was the polished one, the version for announcements and potluck signups and fake birthday wishes. I typed a single line. No salutation, no context. "I've been holding your secret for 10 years. I'm done protecting people who erase me." Then I hit send. Nothing for 5 minutes. Just that little read receipt under each name. Marvine, Clydia, Deshawn, a few cousins. Every one of them saw it, and not one of them answered. Then, from Branwyn, a heart emoji, no words. But it was enough. The kind of enough that confirms what you already knew, that someone else had been watching and just didn't have the nerve to say anything until now. I tossed the phone beside me on the bed and took a breath, the kind that doesn't calm you, just clears space. 26 minutes later, the screen lit up again. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then picked up. "Elira," she said, her voice too sweet, too smooth. "I saw your message." I waited. "Is everything all right, sweetheart? Maybe it's not the time to dig up old wounds. We're trying to have peace, aren't we?" Peace. That word always felt weaponized in her mouth. Translated, it meant, don't cause waves unless you're ready to be blamed for the flood. "I think we've confused peace with silence," I said flatly. She laughed lightly. "You've always been dramatic, you know that? Sensitive? Your father used to say you felt things too much. He also used to say I was the only one who cleaned up after the messes." Silence. Then the classic move, pivot and dismiss. "Let's not become the bitter one in the family, okay? That's not a good look." "Thanks for the advice," I said, and hung up. No goodbye, no love you. Just the click of a line that didn't need to stay open anymore. I got dressed slowly. A plain blouse, clean jeans, sneakers. I wasn't planning to go anywhere dramatic. Just to the diner around the corner to get some air, some pancakes, and maybe remember what it felt like to sit somewhere without being judged for breathing. At the booth, between bites, I opened my phone again. Not to check replies. Still nothing for the record. But to open a folder I hadn't touched in over a year. It was labeled just in case. Inside, scanned emails, receipts for loans that had never been repaid, medical bills with my name at the top, but someone else's story tied to them. Screenshots of messages that started with, "L, I know this is a lot to ask," and ended with silence once I paid. At the bottom, one file stood out. LenaCharleston.pdf. I didn't open it, not yet. But I stared at it like it might blink first. That file, those pages, were the one thing I'd kept to myself. The one truth that, if exposed, would crack their polished little story wide open. It wasn't a bluff. It was the reason they'd always tread just slightly carefully, even as they pushed me further out. Marvine's perfect image, her Instagram-ready marriage, the whispered business trips that didn't match her calendar. That PDF held dates, hotel charges, and names. And I'd held it for a decade. Out of grace, out of restraint, out of some foolish loyalty that they'd long ago stopped earning. I slid the phone face down and looked out the diner window. Cars passed. A couple argued quietly near the parking lot. The waitress filled coffee cups like it was muscle memory. No one cared what I was carrying. No one had to. That was the point. When I paid the check and stepped outside, the sunlight was sharp but welcome. I walked down the block slowly, no destination in mind. I just needed motion. Back at the motel, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't call anyone. I sat by the window and watched the afternoon pass like a train I didn't need to catch. I'd given them a warning. Not a threat. Not a plea. A line. And if they crossed it, they'd find out that the quiet one doesn't stay quiet forever. The next morning, I dressed slower than usual. Not out of indecision, but intention. I wanted to wear something plain, unremarkable, something no one could pick apart later. Gray sweater, dark jeans, a pair of flats I could walk in for hours, if it came to that. Brunch was being held under the big tent in the backyard, a safe fallback in case it rained. It didn't. The sky was obnoxiously clear. Rows of folding tables stretched out under plastic chandeliers, and someone had lit those fake candles again, trying hard to look like warmth without providing any. I arrived halfway through the coffee refill chatter. My seat had no nameplate, again. I didn't bother to ask. Just as I was settling in, Marvine stood up from the head of the table, beaming like she was about to announce a prize. "Before we move on to dessert," she said, her voice just a bit too loud, "let's hear from our little sister. Elira always has the best stories, don't you think?" People clapped, some out of politeness, some because they genuinely didn't see the dagger wrapped in glitter. A few heads turned in my direction. I caught Clydia's expression, tight smile, eyes already scanning for how to control the damage if I stepped too far out of line. I stood, walked to the mic that had been pulled into the center aisle. I could feel the tension before I touched it. Static filled my ear when I spoke. "I just wanted to share a small memory about Dad," I began, my voice steady. "He once told me, the night before his last surgery, that he wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being forgotten." The mic cut. Just like that. I tapped it once. Nothing. A few people chuckled nervously. A cousin behind me said, "Technical stuff, you know how it is." Marvine tilted her head. "Someone check the battery?" Clydia sipped her orange juice like it had nothing to do with her. I smiled, quiet, controlled, and walked back to my seat. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for another try. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a folder. Thick. Tabbed. Labeled. I placed it on the table in front of them, calm as laying down a menu. Marvine blinked. "You've been collecting dirt?" "No," I said. "I documented. There's a difference." She reached for it. I let her. Inside were copies of bank transfers from my accounts to theirs. Text messages asking for help. Screenshots of urgent, "Can you wire this just until next Friday?" Emails with subject lines like "emergency" and "only you can help." Itemized invoices from hospitals, tuition payments, car repairs. Everything they'd asked for. Years of it, all labeled by date and who requested it. One page near the front was titled, "When they said it was an emergency." Marvine flipped through silently at first, then scoffed. "This is petty." "No," I said. "What's petty is pretending I was never part of this family while depending on me like I was your safety net." Deshawn leaned forward, squinting at one of the pages. "Wait, this was you? You paid for the van last year?" Branwen's voice came from the end of the table. "I thought that donation came from the church." I looked around. It didn't. It came from me. But I didn't say anything because I thought keeping peace meant swallowing what hurt. The table went quiet. Clydia still hadn't looked at me directly. She tapped her nails against the edge of her plate like she wanted to make noise, but hadn't picked the right distraction yet. I took a breath. I'm not asking for thanks. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm not even asking to be included. I'm just done pretending that silence is the same thing as grace. I sat back down. No one moved. The tent, the candles, the whole stage they'd built to freeze me out. It all sat still, like someone had hit pause on the performance. Someone at the far end reached for a napkin. It tore. Marvine shifted in her chair. You always find a way to make yourself the center, huh? No, I replied. I just stopped letting you build your narrative around my silence. And with that, I stood, gathered my bag, and walked away. Not storming off, not slamming chairs, just walking. I passed by the buffet table, the silverware stacked neatly, and reached the edge of the tent. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She had receipts." Yes. Yes, I did. I didn't go back to the motel after that brunch. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the road hum beneath me. I didn't need a destination. I just needed space to hold my breath for a bit longer. When the sun started dipping low, I turned back toward the house, not because I missed it, but because Orville had texted. He said he was nearby and needed to speak with me in person. He didn't elaborate, just said, "Your father left something behind. It's time." That was enough to turn the wheel. The dinner portion of the reunion was being set up when I arrived. Long tables under the sycamores, white lights strung like wedding decor, plates already lined up. People smiled and waved when they saw me, too rehearsed to feel real. I nodded back, just enough to keep it moving. Orville was waiting by the far end of the patio, holding a brown envelope, his suit jacket wrinkled from hours in the car. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Maybe he hadn't. He didn't greet me with small talk, no pleasantries, just handed me the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. "Your father gave this to me before his last surgery," he said, his voice low. "He told me to hold it, said, 'Only give it to Alira if it comes to this.' I didn't ask what this meant. We both knew. I opened it with slow hands. Inside was a copy of my father's original will. Clean, legal, notarized, dated 6 months before his final hospitalization. In it, he'd named me executor of his estate. Not Marvane, not Clydia. Me. He wrote in clear language that I was to be the one overseeing decisions regarding the family home, the investments, and, specifically, the future preservation of family legacy. His words, not mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply folded the paper back, slid it into my bag, and thanked Orville with a firm nod. "They changed it, didn't they?" I asked. "They filed a revision. But legally," he paused, "that only holds if you were informed. Were you?" I shook my head. "No." "Then you need to do something about it," he said. "Because they already are." By the time we returned to the table, the food had just been served. Someone had carved the roast. The bread basket was already half empty. No one stood when we approached, except Marvine, who looked up and froze when she saw what was in my hand. Clydia's gaze followed, steady but cautious, like she knew the game had shifted. Orville pulled out the extra chair beside me and sat. No announcement, no invitation, just presence, which sometimes says more than words. I stood up, not rushed, not dramatic, just firm. "I need to say something," I said. Some glanced up. Others kept chewing. But slowly, one by one, heads turned. "My father gave me something," I said, holding up the folder. "A copy of the original will, the one you all never showed me." Marvine laughed once, sharp, strained. "That's old. It was changed later. We agreed." Orville cut in, cool and precise. "Revisions are only valid if all legal beneficiaries were informed. Were they?" He looked directly at Clydia. She didn't blink. "We did what made sense. Elira has always been self-sufficient. She didn't need— That's not how the law works, Orville said. A hush followed. Someone's fork hit the plate with a clink. Branwen asked, almost under her breath. So, the house, it's hers? I didn't look at Marvane. I looked at the space between us. I didn't ask for this, but I won't let you rewrite history and steal what was meant for me. Marvane opened her mouth, then shut it. The flush in her cheeks was louder than any reply she could have given. Clydia turned to me, voice soft but cold. So what? You're going to sue your family now? No, I said. I'm going to enforce what my father wanted, and if anyone continues to misrepresent it, I'll let the courts handle it. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. Silence is only powerful when the other side expects you to stay quiet. Deshawn stood up without a word and walked away. The clatter of his chair broke the silence. No one followed him. For the first time in years, Marvane didn't have a comeback. Her face was still, her fingers tight around her napkin. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Clydia sat back in her chair, staring at the half-eaten piece of cornbread like it might tell her what to do next. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't owe them that. I looked at Orville, nodded once, and sat down. I'd given them the chance to do this the quiet way. They chose the opposite. The next morning, I found the envelope tucked beneath my motel door. No return address, no handwriting I recognized, just my name typed in block letters on a plain manila flap. Inside was a small USB drive and a note printed on the back of a gas station receipt. It read, "You deserve to know what really happened." No signature, but I didn't need one. I didn't plug it in right away. I stared at it for a while, holding it between my fingers like it might melt. Then I crossed the room, pulled my laptop out of the drawer, and clicked it awake. The folder on the drive was titled, After the Funeral, Strategy Call. I knew that title. I knew the cadence of that phrasing. I'd heard Clydia say it before, usually when discussing money or legacy, or whenever she felt like the family's image needed managing. The recording started mid-conversation. At first, it was hard to tell who was speaking over the phone, but then I heard Marvane's voice, clear as glass. She sounded calm, confident. "We can't let her control anything," she said. "If Elira gets a copy of the will, it's over." Clydia replied, "She won't. She never asks. She just gives." Then silence. Then laughter, low and knowing. Marvane again. "That's what makes it easy. She wants to be needed. She won't push back." There it was. My whole relationship with them boiled down to a single truth. They mistook my love for submission. I listened all the way through, twice. The second time, I turned on captions, so I could see their words in black and white, just in case anyone ever doubted me again. By the time the audio ended, my hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry. I was done. Not even an hour passed before my phone lit up with a call. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. They called again. The third time, I picked up. "Elira!" Clydia's voice was soft. Too soft. "Yes." "I just heard from Deshawn. I understand you're upset." "Is that what you understand?" A pause. Then she shifted tones. "If you go through with this, if you make this public, I don't know if my heart can handle it." There it was. The guilt grenade. "You've always been a passionate one," she added, "but don't let your emotions ruin what little peace we still have. You're better than that, sweetheart." I didn't say anything. "I mean, what's done is done, right?" she continued, almost pleading. "Let's not punish everyone for choices that made sense at the time." I ended the call. No dramatic line, no emotional rebuttal, just silence. Because sometimes the most deafening answer is no response at all. I closed the laptop, took a walk down to the parking lot, let the air settle. There were kids playing soccer across the street, the thump of the ball steady and careless. I stood there for 5 minutes, absorbing what normal looked like. Then I went back to my room, reopened my laptop, and began writing. Not a threat. Not a smear. Just facts. I started the document like this. My name is Elira Adams. I am the daughter of Henrik Adams. I was the named executor of his original will. I have since been excluded, manipulated, and lied to by those who were supposed to protect that legacy. This is what I know. I didn't list names. Not yet. I didn't speculate. I documented. Each entry had a timestamp, a scanned copy, or a recording file ID. I made it clean, professional, not emotional, but unmistakably human. And at the end of the statement, before I signed my name, I added one final line. I was not removed from the family. I left it when it stopped being one. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the motel ceiling again. Same old pattern of peeling paint and water stains. But this time, I wasn't waiting for them to make a move. They already had. And I was done being their cleanup crew. If truth was a bomb, I was done holding the pin for someone else's comfort. The morning after I sent the document, I took my coffee to go and walked the edge of the estate property. Not because I needed fresh air, but because I wanted to see it all one last time. With clear eyes, not the kind that hoped to belong. Tables were already being cleared, decorations tossed into trash bags. The reunion was wrapping up, but the performance wasn't quite over. People milled around the front porch, pretending to chat about weather, sports, the drive home, anything but the earthquake I'd set off. By mid-morning, word had spread. Eyes followed me, but lips stayed shut. I wasn't there to gloat. I wasn't there to be forgiven. I was there to finish it. They'd planned one last thank you brunch for the out-of-town relatives. Marvine, of course, had placed herself in charge. She stood near the mimosa bar, all smiles and clenched teeth, acting like nothing had happened. Clydia avoided eye contact altogether, busying herself with napkins that didn't need straightening. I was about to leave when Branwen stepped onto the patio with something in her hand, an iPad and a folded piece of paper. Her cheeks were flushed, but her spine was straight. She didn't glance at me as she walked toward the middle of the group, just cleared her throat and started reading. I have something I need to say, she began, voice shaking only on the first word. This is an email I received from Marvine 6 months ago, after I wished Elira a happy birthday. That got their attention. She opened the message and read it aloud. You can be friendly with her if you want, but just know you're picking a side. If you continue contact, don't expect to be included in anything going forward. Branwen paused. I didn't reply. I didn't want to choose. But watching what happened these last few days, I realized silence was choosing too. She turned to face me. I should have spoken sooner, but I see it now, what you've carried, and I'm sorry. No one clapped. No one moved. Even Marvin didn't interrupt. Her jaw flexed, but she stayed still, calculating, watching her narrative crumble from someone else's voice. I met Branwen's eyes, gave a small nod. Then I walked into the house. Not because I was upset, but because I had one last place to check before I left for good. The guest house in the back, where I used to stay during summer breaks, hadn't changed much. Same dusty curtains, same creaky floors. In the desk drawer by the window, buried beneath old postcards and dried-out pens, was an envelope with no name on it. Inside were 6 documents: hospital forms, invoices, donation acknowledgments, all in my handwriting. My name signed at the bottom. But each of them had been scanned, edited, and submitted under Marvine's. It wasn't just financial manipulation. It was identity theft, dressed in sisterhood. I sat down on the bed, placed the documents in a new folder, and slid it into my bag. When I stepped back outside, I didn't walk toward the others. I stood by the old oak tree and texted a short message to the group chat. Meet me at the driveway, 5 minutes. To their credit, they came. Marvine, Clydia, even Deshawn, though he stayed toward the back. I didn't ask for their attention. I didn't give them a speech. Instead, I handed each of them a plain white envelope. Inside, legal revocation forms, financial disassociations, cease and desist letters drafted by Orville. No emotion, just paperwork. I'm severing every tie, I said, calm and direct. No more accounts, no more emergency wires, no more fallback roles. If you need someone else to clean up your messes, I suggest you start now. Marvine stared at hers like it might bite. This is extreme. What you did was extreme, I replied. This is closure. Clydia looked at me like she wanted to speak, but no words came. And that was fine. I didn't need them anymore. I turned and walked to my car. Not a dramatic exit, not a door slam or tires screeching, just the quiet closing of a chapter I'd rewritten on my own terms. As I drove away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. They were still standing there, papers in hand, mouths shut, storyless. I didn't burn bridges. I just walked away with the matches they handed me years ago. After I drove past the estate, I didn't take the highway. I took the long way back through town, winding past the school where I used to volunteer, the park where Dad and I once sat in silence, feeding geese like it was our own sacred ritual. I didn't plan it, but my hands turned the wheel on their own. Maybe my body knew where I needed to go before I did. The sun was soft overhead, dipping behind wisps of cloud, and the breeze smelled like cut grass and old memories. I parked by the curb, got out, and walked slowly toward the lake at the far end of the park. The same bench was still there, crooked on one side. The same water, still as glass, reflecting a version of the world that looked gentler than it was. I sat for a while, just listening. No music, no cars, just the water and birds, and that strange comfort that comes from stillness that no one expects you to perform inside. There was one thing left to do. After checking out of the guest house that morning, I'd gone up to the attic, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. I knew there were still things left behind, things that used to matter. I'd almost missed it. Tucked beneath a pile of folded quilts inside a cedar chest was a small envelope, yellowed at the edges. My name was written across the front in Dad's blocky handwriting, the kind he only used when he wanted his words to last. No one had ever mentioned it. No one had delivered it. I opened it slowly, hands steady, breath low. Inside was a letter, dated 2 months before his last surgery. Elira, I know they'll never see you for what you are, but I did. I know what you gave, what you held back, what you swallowed so they wouldn't have to taste bitterness. I couldn't change them, but I could leave you something that said, I saw you. You were never invisible to me. That was it. No legal advice, no instructions, just words I had waited my whole life to hear, only to realize now I didn't need them to be okay. But they helped anyway. I folded the letter back into its envelope, slipped it into my coat pocket, and sat still. The lake rippled once. A goose honked in the distance. The breeze tugged gently at my sleeve. When I got back to the motel that afternoon, I saw the messages, all lined up in the group thread like beads on a string someone had dropped and never picked up. Neva's been crying. It feels weird without you here. You've made your point. Can we just move on? I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled up my emergency contact form, the one I'd filled out years ago when they insisted on being listed for insurance, for legal fallback, for the illusion of safety. I opened the form, deleted every name, and typed in my own. Emergency contact, Elira Adams. That felt more honest than anything I'd ever signed. Later that week, I printed out a copy of the family group chat, the thread where they'd shared birthdays, requests for help, fake encouragement, and empty praise. I folded the pages into a paper boat, neat and deliberate, then drove back to the lake. Same bench, same quiet. I walked to the water's edge, crouched low, and placed the boat on the surface. The wind caught it slowly, then fully. I watched it drift, no resistance, no collapse. You don't owe them your silence anymore, I whispered. It wasn't a declaration, it was a release. I sat back on the bench until the boat vanished from view. Not sunk, just gone. That evening, back home, I didn't unpack immediately. I left the suitcase by the door, made a cup of tea, and watched the light shift across the walls. I was tired, but not drained. Alone, but not abandoned. Empty, but in a way that finally made room for something else. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but peace. And that was enough. I didn't win. I just stopped losing myself. And maybe that's the only kind of victory that lasts. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean you've given up. It means you've finally stopped waiting for someone to treat you the way you've always deserved. For years, I believed keeping the peace meant staying silent. That being the strong one meant fixing everything, even when it broke me. But here's what I know now. Love without respect is a trap, not a bond. And being part of a family should never cost you your dignity. I didn't leave to hurt them. I left to save what was left of me. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one who kept things together while everyone else took you for granted, you're not alone. And you don't owe anyone your silence just so they can stay comfortable. We talk a lot in this country about loyalty, about forgiveness, about blood being thicker than water. But maybe the real test of love isn't how much you can endure. Maybe it's how bravely you can draw the line when enough is enough. So let me ask you, have you ever walked away from people you once called family? Do you believe forgiveness requires reconciliation? Or can it exist without going back? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video didn't sit right with you, that's okay too. Share your perspective. Let's have a real conversation. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, honest, human, sometimes messy, but always rooted in truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You never know. The next one might just be yours. Thanks for watching. And remember, healing doesn't always look like hugging it out. Sometimes it looks like closing the door and finally locking it.